In the early 1940s, the world was engulfed in an unprecedented global conflict. World War II was spreading, and the major powers of the world were striving to leverage their military capabilities, technology, and intelligence to gain an edge on the battlefield. In the Pacific, Japan conducted rapid expansion campaigns, occupying numerous islands and territories from China to Southeast Asia, posing a direct threat to U.S. territories in the Pacific, including Hawaii, the Philippines, Guam, and other islands. On December 7, 1941, the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor completely changed the course of the war for the United States. The strike inflicted severe damage on the U.S. Pacific Fleet and created an urgent need for intelligence, operational coordination, and secure communications in the modern warfare environment. The U.S. realized that in order to combat a sophisticated adversary like Japan, it needed not only strong naval, ground, and air forces, but also highly secure communication and encryption methods. In this context, the U.S. Marine Corps faced a critical strategic challenge: how to transmit operational information quickly, accurately, and without being deciphered by the enemy. Inefficient communications could lead to failures in amphibious operations, loss of life, and reduced control over the battlefield. During World War II, military forces around the world developed various cipher systems. Germany's Enigma machine was a prominent example, forcing the Allies to exert great efforts to break it. Japan also had sophisticated cipher systems, including the U.S. State Department's pre-war Purple Code, and had successfully decrypted many Allied messages. However, in the early years of the war, the U.S. had to find ways to protect vital intelligence and operational messages for the Marine Corps, especially during amphibious operations on small Pacific islands. Japan had deployed a powerful intelligence apparatus. One of its most important centers was the Ada Communications Unit, located about 20 miles from Tokyo, which housed 500 signal analysis specialists, operated 118 receiving machines, and used 20 direction-finding devices. Equipped with cutting-edge technology, this center was considered one of Japan's most sophisticated cryptanalysis units, capable of decrypting most Allied diplomatic and military signals. On March 15, 1944, Commander Atsuzo Kurihara, head of the Ada Communications Unit, was monitoring messages from the Pacific Theater. It was the third time he had sat by a cold, bitter cup of tea at his desk in less than 24 hours, attempting to decipher U.S. Marine signals during the Marshall Islands campaign. These signals, transmitted from forward islands, contained information on troop positions, landing plans, artillery coordination, and tactical operations. The sounds coming through the receivers puzzled the Japanese analysts. They were not random frequencies, but had a clear structure, with order, duration, and rhythm corresponding to operational units. Yet despite employing all analytical methods, frequency analysis of characters, identifying patterns and grammatical structures, and consulting Allied languages such as English, French, Dutch, Spanish, Philippine dialects, and Chinese, they could not decrypt the messages. Kurihara and his team had successfully broken many ciphers before. Before the U.S. entered the war, they had deciphered numerous important diplomatic and military messages, including parts of the U.S. Purple Code, allowing Japan to collect crucial information from the U.S. State Department in the early war years. They had also decrypted British communications and other U.S. military codes. However, the messages they were receiving from the Marine Corps were entirely beyond their decryption capabilities. What was remarkable was that even Japan's top linguists and cryptographers could not determine the origin or nature of these signals. The sounds resembled language, with consistent rhythm and structure, yet did not match any known language. Japan even brought in Navajo-speaking prisoners, such as Joe Kailumia, to the center to try decoding the messages. But they still failed completely. Even fluent Navajo speakers could not understand the messages without code training, as the language was arranged according to a unique military cipher system, transforming ordinary words into tactical messages. While Japan faced this deadlock, The U.S. Marine Corps implemented an innovative idea, using the Navajo native language as the basis for an unbreakable military code. The concept was proposed by Philip Johnston, a European American who had grown up among the Navajo and was one of the very few non-Navajo fluent in the language. He realized that this language, preserved for centuries in the American Southwest, could become a strategic weapon. Navajo has a complex structure. It is verb-based, with millions of variations through prefixes and suffixes, 4 distinct tones, high, low, rising, falling, that change word meanings, and phonemes absent in Japanese or English. Even a slight mispronunciation could render an entire sentence meaningless. This made traditional analytical decryption methods completely ineffective. The signals transmitted by the code talkers were not only fast, but also absolutely secure. For instance, messages about artillery positions, landing coordination, or combat operations could be sent in seconds compared to 30 minutes using the standard M209 cipher machine. From the Japanese perspective, these signals were structured noise but incomprehensible, making them feel as if they were fighting in the dark, unable to anticipate the enemy's next moves. During this period, Japan used every measure to break the code. Analyzing sounds, comparing recordings of Native American languages, consulting scholars, and using machines to measure sound frequencies. They even sought cooperation with Germany to try decryption, but with no success. The process consumed time and resources but yielded no valuable intelligence. It is regarded as Japan's greatest cryptographic failure during World War II. Meanwhile, the U.S. Marine Corps continued to develop and expand the Code Talkers program. Its emergence completely transformed how the U.S. coordinated operations in the Pacific, from planning amphibious landings to coordinating artillery, medical services, logistics, and other combat activities. The Code Talkers became the backbone of military communications, protecting information from enemy decryption efforts, and played a decisive role in the success of numerous critical campaigns. While the U.S. Marine Corps faced the critical need to secure tactical information, the solution did not come from machines or modern technology, but from an indigenous American language. Navajo, or Diné-Bizaad, is the language of the Navajo people living in the American Southwest, mainly spanning Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, and Colorado. By 1940, the Navajo population numbered around 170,000, most residing on a 27,000 square mile territory. The language had been preserved over centuries, developing an extremely complex phonetic system and grammatical structure, entirely different from European or Asian languages. Philip Johnston, born in 1892, was the only non-Navajo outside the community fluent in Navajo. He grew up in Navajo territory as the son of a Protestant missionary and had extensive exposure to the language and culture from a young age. Johnston was one of very few outsiders capable of directly translating sermons, stories, and complex conversations in Navajo. By the age of 15, he had been invited to Washington, D.C. to interpret for Navajo leaders and even met President Theodore Roosevelt. Johnston's knowledge and experience enabled him to recognize the unique military potential of the Navajo language. The security of Navajo relied on several distinctive factors. First, it is a verb-centric language, with actions described through millions of combinations of prefixes and suffixes, allowing highly complex meanings to be conveyed in a single word. Second, the language has 4 distinct tones, high, low, rising, and falling, that completely change a word's meaning. Even a slight mispronunciation could render a sentence meaningless, providing a natural barrier for anyone not properly trained. Third, Navajo employs many phonemes absent in English, Japanese, or most other languages, from ejective stops, throaty plosives, and voiceless lateral fricatives like wind blowing across the teeth, to nasalized vowels and glottalized sounds. The combination of these features created a natural cryptographic core, nearly impossible to break using conventional methods. In December 1941, after the U.S. was attacked at Pearl Harbor, Johnston learned about experiments using other Native Americans, such as the Comanche, in military exercises in Louisiana. He realized that while these trials were useful, they were ad hoc and unsystematic. He proposed a comprehensive, official, and scalable solution, using the Navajo language itself as a tactical code. On February 28, 1942, Johnston presented this proposal to Brigadier General Clayton Vogel at Camp Elliott, San Diego. The demonstration involved 4 Navajo men from Los Angeles transmitting military messages, timed against standard encryption methods. The results astonished the officers. Navajo messages were sent in 20 seconds, while the standard M209 cipher machine took 30 minutes. The experiment demonstrated that Navajo could serve as a perfectly secure, fast, and accurate communication tool, surpassing any mechanical encryption device of the time. With this proof of effectiveness, a pilot program was launched. On May 4, 1942, 29 young Navajo men were recruited at Fort Wingate, New Mexico, including Chester Nez, Carl Gorman, Lloyd Oliver, and John Bennerly. They came from across the Navajo territory with diverse backgrounds. Some had attended boarding schools where speaking Navajo was forbidden, while others maintained traditional lifestyles, herding sheep and living largely isolated from modern society. At Camp Elliott, the recruits were confined in a highly secured building for 8 weeks to develop the first military Navajo code. The task was extremely challenging. They had to create terms for military concepts non-existent in their language, build a code system based on Navajo words, and ensure the code was memorable and expandable for the future. The code talkers developed encryption based on cultural logic and imagery: submarine, ironfish, a fish made of iron swimming underwater; battleship, whale, the largest creature in the ocean; fighter plane, hummingbird, fast, agile birds in the air; bomber, buzzard, vultures circling before diving. Additionally, the English alphabet was assigned multiple words to prevent frequency analysis. For example, the letter E, the most common in English, had 4 substitute words. Code talkers would randomly rotate these, ensuring no repeatable patterns that could be deciphered. Initially, they developed 211 terms, all memorized. No code books existed to prevent capture by the enemy. Chester Nez, one of the first code talkers, later recalled, "We trained relentlessly. One mistake could cost a comrade's life. In our culture, words have power. Speaking correctly is sacred." The first deployment of the Navajo Code occurred at Guadalcanal in August 1942, when 15 code talkers joined the 1st Marine Division. Previously, Japan had successfully decoded other U.S. messages and predicted landing plans. But when Navajo messages were transmitted, all Japanese predictions failed completely. The messages were incomprehensible to cryptographers and intelligence officers, even when recorded, analyzed for frequency, compared with known languages, or presented to Navajo-speaking prisoners. After the idea of using the Navajo language as a tactical code was proven effective, the U.S. Marine Corps began the process of selecting young Navajo men to join the program. The goal was to create a team of highly skilled communicators who could transmit messages quickly, accurately, and with absolute security, responsible for maintaining communications during intense combat operations in the Pacific. This was a critical mission, as any mistake could result in heavy casualties among landing forces and artillery units and reduce the effectiveness of military campaigns. On May 4, 1942, the first 29 Navajo recruits were selected at Fort Wingate, New Mexico. They represented various regions of the Navajo territory and came from diverse backgrounds. Some had attended boarding schools where speaking Navajo was forbidden and punished, while others lived traditionally, herding sheep and remaining largely isolated from modern society. Despite these differences, they all shared one key trait: fluency in Navajo and excellent memory to retain new vocabulary and structures. At Camp Elliott, they were placed in an extremely strict and secure training environment. The entire program took place in a locked, highly guarded building to prevent information leaks. They were tasked with developing a complete military code based on the Navajo language, creating terms for objects, vehicles, units, and military tactics that previously did not exist in their language. This work was challenging, requiring creativity, memory, and logical thinking in the Navajo way. The code talkers created a coding system based on cultural imagery and logic. Submarine, ironfish, the image of a fish made of iron swimming underwater. Battleship, whale, the largest creature in the ocean. Fighter plane, hummingbird, fast and agile birds in the air. Bomber, buzzard, vultures circling before diving. To enhance security, the English alphabet was assigned multiple Navajo words to resist frequency analysis. For example, the letter E, the most common in English, had 4 substitute words. Code talkers would rotate these randomly, ensuring no repeatable patterns could aid the enemy in decoding. Training focused not only on memorizing vocabulary and new terms, but also on practicing message transmission under harsh combat conditions. They trained in soundproof rooms to simulate battlefield noise, sent messages over radios while wearing gas masks, and performed grueling physical exercises to mimic battlefield stress. Accuracy was paramount. Even a small error could lead to misdirected artillery, missed targets, or casualties among comrades. Beyond basic transmission exercises, the code talkers were trained to develop creative solutions and expand the code when encountering new technologies or situations. For instance, with the advent of the atomic bomb was coded as metal egg in Navajo. Kamikaze planes were called neti, meaning wind of death. Each new term followed the cultural logic and phonetics of Navajo, ensuring only trained individuals could understand its meaning. The program also instilled discipline, endurance, and teamwork. Code talkers operated in teams, maintaining continuous communication during campaigns, and learned to cope with pressure, danger, and unexpected situations on the battlefield. They ensured that every message, short or long, was transmitted with absolute accuracy, regardless of circumstances. Another crucial factor was absolute security. No code books or written materials were allowed on the battlefield. Everything had to be memorized. This turned the code talkers into living computers, capable of transmitting information quickly, accurately, and unbreakably. Even fluent Navajo speakers outside the program could not understand the messages without training. In addition to technical skills, training emphasized responsibility and professional ethics. Chester Nez, one of the first code talkers, recalled, "We trained relentlessly. One mistake could cost a comrade's life. In our culture, words have power. Speaking correctly is sacred." The combination of culture, language, and military discipline created a unique team in world military history. When training was complete, the code talkers were ready for their first campaigns. They carried with them knowledge, skills, and an entirely new coding system, a strategic tool unlike any before, allowing the U.S. to maintain information superiority in critical battles across the Pacific. From this point, the code talkers were not just communicators. They became symbols of cultural, linguistic, and indigenous intellectual power, proving that cultural differences could become a strategic advantage, surpassing any mechanical technology. Immediately after completing their training, the code talkers were deployed to the Pacific battlefields, starting with Guadalcanal in August 1942. This was the first amphibious landing undertaken by the U.S. Marine Corps after the decisive victory at Midway. Prior to this, Japan had successfully decoded most U.S. military messages, including communications from the Marines, Navy, and Army Air Forces. However, when the code talkers began transmitting messages in Navajo, all Japanese predictions and plans instantly became meaningless. Even fully intercepted messages were completely incomprehensible to Japan's best analysts. During this period, the tactical impact of the code talkers became evident. Messages that previously took tens of minutes to encode and decode using M209 machines or traditional methods could now be transmitted in seconds with absolute accuracy. Even amid fierce combat, code talkers maintained continuous communication, ensuring artillery, naval, and air units operated in precise coordination. Information on enemy positions, troop movements, medical support, and logistics was transmitted rapidly, minimizing U.S. casualties and increasing operational efficiency. A notable example was the Battle of Tarawa in November 1943. During 76 hours of continuous fighting, 6 code talkers maintained communication between units, transmitting hundreds of messages without a single error. Lloyd Oliver, one of the code talkers, transmitted messages non-stop for 48 hours, coordinating artillery fire as shells whizzed overhead. These results proved that the Navajo code was not only secure, but also exceptionally fast and accurate, something mechanical cipher machines could not achieve under intense battlefield conditions. In the Mariana Campaign, the code talkers continued to demonstrate their vital role. 24 code talkers worked continuously to maintain communication channels, especially during the amphibious landings on Saipan. At this time, Japan employed every possible measure to disrupt communications, from jamming signals to deploying spies fluent in indigenous languages. However, the tones, grammar, and complexity of Navajo rendered all enemy efforts futile. Even Japanese personnel who spoke Navajo could not decipher the messages without specialized military code training. The strategic impact of the code talkers reached its peak during the Battle of Iwo Jima in February 1945. There, 6 code talkers worked in teams, maintaining continuous communication for the first 48 hours of the battle, sending and receiving over 800 critical messages. They coordinated 30,000 landing troops, artillery from over 100 warships, air support, and medical and logistical teams. This enabled U.S. forces to execute precise tactics and respond effectively to intense Japanese counterattacks. Thanks to this coordination, Iwo Jima became one of the most successful campaigns in terms of communications and tactics for the U.S. Marine Corps, with the Navajo Code at its center. The code talkers were also deployed during the Okinawa campaign, involving 183,000 troops over 82 continuous days. 35 code talkers maintained uninterrupted communications between units, ensuring that all combat operations, troop movements, and artillery coordination were precise. Despite Japanese attempts to mimic voices, imitate tones, or jam signals, they could not replicate the unique phonetics and complex structure of Navajo, rendering all decoding attempts futile. Throughout the war, Japan recognized that the Marine Code was unique and completely unbreakable. Japanese intelligence reports indicated they deployed their best specialists, using all audio analysis techniques, statistical methods, and even consulting scholars and linguists in attempts to break it. They replayed recordings, analyzed sound frequencies, compared them with other indigenous languages, and used slow-motion devices to hear detailed pronunciations. Yet despite all these efforts, they achieved nothing. Even native Navajo prisoners could not decode the messages without military code training. One notable case was Joe Kailumia, a Navajo soldier captured during the Bataan campaign, who became Japan's last hope to break the code. Although he understood Navajo, he could not comprehend the coded messages and was brutally tortured for months. Japan used every method: torture, starvation, exposure to freezing conditions, but he could only repeat what he heard without understanding its military meaning. This failure convinced Japan that the Navajo Code was unprecedented, surpassing all linguistic knowledge and technical methods they possessed. The success of the code talkers relied not only on language but also on people. These young men worked under extreme pressure, in actual combat, amid bombs and gunfire, yet maintained near-perfect accuracy. This made them an essential part of military strategy, transforming the way the U.S. organized communications during World War II. The Navajo Code also had profound strategic and psychological effects on the enemy. Japan, despite its powerful intelligence network, could not anticipate U.S. actions through tactical messages. They were blind to information, unable to predict attacks or respond in time, resulting in heavy casualties and lost strategic opportunities. Many Japanese officers admitted that being unable to decode the Navajo code made them feel defeated before the battle even began, a decisive psychological failure in many major engagements. After World War II ended, the strategic role of the code talkers remained highly classified. The Navajo Code Talkers program was still sensitive during the Cold War, as the ability to use an indigenous language for tactical encryption retained potential value in future conflicts. The Code Talkers returned home but were forbidden from speaking about their missions, creating a significant psychological burden. They had helped shape history and protect freedom, yet received no public recognition. As a result, many Code Talkers had to conceal their heroism, returning to communities where they still faced discrimination. In New Mexico and Arizona, Native Americans were denied voting rights until 1948, and in Utah until 1957. They faced difficulties accessing public services, hotels, and restaurants. However, many Code Talkers turned to traditional Navajo rituals to restore their spirits, such as the Enemy Way ceremony, which cleansed the spiritual effects of war and maintained their connection to culture and language. In 1968, the Code Talkers program was declassified, paving the way for official recognition. For the first time, Code Talkers were honored at a meeting of the 4th Marine Division in 1969. Yet national acknowledgement took longer. In 1982, President Ronald Reagan proclaimed August 14th as National Code Talkers Day, recognizing the extraordinary contributions of those who used the Navajo language in wartime. A major milestone came in 2001 when President George W. Bush awarded the Congressional Gold Medal to the 29 original Navajo Code Talkers at the U.S. Capitol. Only 5 were still alive to receive the honor. In his speech, President Bush emphasized, "Today we honor 29 Native Americans who performed a service only they could accomplish." Chester Nez, one of the surviving Code Talkers, said, "We were ordinary men given an extraordinary task. We used our sacred language to help win the war." The Navajo Code is not only a story of war and cryptography, it is a testament to the power of culture and human diversity. Native Americans, from communities whose language and culture the government once tried to erase, used their cultural heritage to protect the nation. Moreover, the success of the Code Talkers demonstrated that indigenous languages are not primitive or underdeveloped, but capable of conveying complex ideas, from rituals to military strategy, and can be modernized when necessary. During World War II, other tribes also contributed Code Talkers. 17 Comanche participated in the European campaign, including D-Day, alongside members of the Hopi, Cherokee, Lakota, and other tribes. In 2008, the Code Talkers Recognition Act expanded the designation to include all tribes that contributed, acknowledging the diversity and strategic role of indigenous languages in U.S. military history. The legacy of the Code Talkers extends beyond the military. The program transformed perceptions of Native Americans from marginalized communities to national heroes, symbols of intellect and cultural strength. The Navajo language, once banned in schools, is now taught with renewed pride, demonstrating that language and culture can be living strategic assets. Stories of the Code Talkers continue to inspire younger generations of Native Americans to learn and preserve their languages, showing that cultural heritage is not only a legacy of the past, but also a modern tool to build strength, protect freedom, and sustain identity. Researchers and educators have noted that the program illustrates a profound lesson. Differences are not weaknesses. They are strategic advantages that can be leveraged to defend a nation and its people. The symbolic importance of the Code Talkers has been recognized worldwide. In the 1980s and 1990s, Japanese researchers and international scholars studied Japan's failure to decode Navajo messages. They acknowledged that an indigenous language, though seemingly simple to outsiders, could serve as a perfect code, unbreakable by conventional analysis or mechanical technology. This stands as proof of the power of human intellect and culture, surpassing any technical tool. Today, as the last code talkers pass away, their legacy lives on in the language, culture, and education of Native Americans, as well as in modern thinking about security and cryptography. August 14th is commemorated annually as a reminder of the importance of cultural diversity, that marginalized communities can contribute strategic value, and that the power of language and people can protect freedom. The Code Talkers not only achieved victory in war, but also demonstrated that differences, when respected and cultivated, become extraordinary strengths. The Navajo Code remains a vivid testament that people, culture, and language can create unbreakable codes that even mathematics and technology cannot overcome. It is a timeless message. Diversity is not just cultural richness. It is a strategic weapon for freedom and intelligence.